question to ask you. And although the question might not make sense, it's the most profound question you'll ever be asked. Is this the kind of question that makes you think? I mean, actually think. What are you willing to sacrifice in order to save yourself?
We praise God for the blessings of freedom, and we ask God to forever bless this magnificent land that we all love so much.
So the challenge of my generation and your generation is to make sure radical Islam never gets to marry up with weapons of mass destruction that could kill a lot of Americans and our allies. Now tell me how you do that where all of us stay over here and nobody's over there.
Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.
Before writing Iconoclast, I stumbled across several videos that changed my mind about the world. This in turn led me to read a couple books I highly recommend. It wasn't that these books gave me completely new ideas. Instead, they helped to reshape my way of thinking about ideas I already had. Critical thinking can be traced all the way back to ancient Greece through Socrates. He taught what is known as the Socratic method. Listen to the other person's point of view, reflect on what you heard, cross-examine and refine, restate the new viewpoint based off the new information, repeat. Now this isn't a skill that comes easy to a lot of people.
It's so much easier just to believe whatever we're told. You actually have to train your mind to think this way.
To be clear, a critical thinker is not the same thing as a conspiracy theorist. A conspiracy theorist will form opinions based off unanswered questions, whereas a critical thinker will accept the fact that not every question has an answer, or at least not at the time that they ask with the information available.
Let me give you an example. For most of my adult life, before I decided to leave the political spectrum altogether, I was mostly right-leaning, so I'll use that side for a moment. Let's say that an unreliable internet post came out that said that there is an impending event that's been planned by some secretive government cabal that's going to affect all of us. Unfortunately, this happens a lot. Now, say that this post went viral. A non-thinker would take it at face value and believe it and run with it, and they would spread it. A thinker would want to sit down and discuss it. And a critical thinker would say, show me the evidence for this. Now let's look at the left side of things. Let's say that you hold a political view that you are very passionate about and someone disagrees with you about it. The non-thinker would assume with pure emotion that the person is evil and probably assign several labels to them. The thinker would wonder, well, maybe this person just hasn't heard any of this and they don't know any better. The critical thinker would ask the question, how come you feel that way? And then would proceed to listen from that point forward. Unfortunately, we don't see hardly any of this anymore.
When we consider the ramifications of what happens to a society that does not have this basic skill, the scenarios that play out are not that shocking. In fact, they're very familiar. How much hostility would go away if the majority of us were willing to ask ourselves, what if I'm wrong? Do we have a right to be surprised by the amount of political division we see growing every year when the vast majority of us are convinced we are the right ones? Why do we do this? Do we do this because we genuinely believe we are correct? Or are we really afraid of being wrong? Asking questions like this is a step towards developing our mind to critically think. However, many people who already have this ability rarely if ever use it to its fullest. What do I mean by that? Well, what if we allow ourselves to look at our world from a third-person point of view? Instead of questioning the way the game is being played, what if we question the authenticity of the game itself? If we are going to fully question the game being played, we must first stop playing it. This is the only way we can form a completely unbiased view of the entire system. We must then dissect it, pillar by pillar, until we can fully grasp how it's maintained. Only then can we begin to see where the progress needs to be made. We can start with the most prominent in our society, the political realm. It's truly fascinating to see how long we can maintain our participation in what can easily be described as a pendulum system. One would think after the first few times of seeing the revolving door power transitioning that something new needs to be tried. Yet here we are. At least for the United States, our political machine is clockwork. Every election brings with it a sense of dread for one side and a sense of hope for the other. After another 4 to 8 years, the roles switch, everything that was done is reversed, and we are back to square one with the complaints, protests, and hostile discourse. Yet, nothing significant ever really changes. The madness of this rinse and repeat system goes even deeper. In this automatic cycle, the voters are confined to an invisible parameter of electing only millionaires and billionaires. This is because the cost of even running a noticeable campaign is far beyond what the average citizen can afford. As a result, and just like so many times before in human history, the rich continue to rule over the poor. Yet, we still choose to believe the lies we are handed about these politicians relating to the vast majority of us in some way, as if these people who graduated from Ivy League schools and live in mansions could ever relate to the blue-collar masses that barely get by with each paycheck. They will talk about issues that we are told to care about instead of the ones that we should care about, while selling a basket of solutions. And then they'll proceed to insult our intelligence further by asking for donations to their million-dollar campaigns, while we can barely afford to keep our lights on. To finish this off, they'll play the role of tribal leader as the divide down the middle pulls us farther and farther away from unification with our fellow man. Just like gang warfare, Whoever is not on our political side should be either changed or shunned. Otherwise, we'd risk a wave of personal attacks being thrown our way.
Have you ever noticed in a political debate that usually the two sides that are doing it are not giving ideas out of their own? It's usually something that they've heard repeated in the media or plagiarized. For example, let's say somebody on the right is not agreeing with something somebody on the left has said, so they'll call them a Marxist or a communist, even if what the other side is saying doesn't align with those beliefs.
Keep this in mind when listening to the next heated political discussion you encounter. Make a mental note of how many things being said are nothing more than verbal regurgitations of trending headlines. You'll be amazed at how little originality of thought you'll find in such banter, which leads one to question, why participate in such a discussion, especially to the point that it becomes an emotionally charged debate. I've lost count of how many times I've heard the average person bring up the national debt as if it's something to lose sleep over. People will always talk about how it needs to be paid off and how we can't afford to keep increasing it. The reality is that the entire thing is a concept of numbers that cannot be paid off. The interest alone makes it mathematically impossible to pay off because there isn't enough currency in circulation to do so. Even if we started all over and printed the first dollar of our currency, that $1 would carry with it interest, which means that already more is owed than what exists. Knowing this, why are we letting this bother us? And why are we using it to attack the other side and blame them for its status? Instead of losing sleep over made-up numbers on a screen, in my personal opinion, these are the things that the average voter should be more worried about finding answers to. How to increase the agricultural yield. How to feed the over 44 million Americans who are starving within our own borders. How to solve the homeless crisis for the over 500,000 homeless in America. How to improve the curriculums in our educational system. This should be top priority, considering over 10% of the US population believes in flat Earth. If 10% doesn't sound like a lot, that is 33 million people. How to reformulate our food processing, considering our food is a majority of mass-produced and processed junk that is filled with carcinogenic ingredients. How to solve the growing mental health crisis. How to refocus our healthcare system to be disease-focused instead of symptom-focused. How to reconfigure our power grid to be more stable. For example, Denmark and France have some of the strongest grids in the world. Adopting their practices would be beneficial. And lastly, resources devoted towards reducing the prison population. This is not suggesting letting everyone out of prison, more so understanding the cause of having the highest incarceration rate in the world. Instead of handling these issues, they care more about generational conflicts happening in a country you've never visited, and there is nothing you can do about it. Once you vote them into office, that's where their power begins and your power ceases. Nothing prevents them from carrying out actions that suit their own interests in the name of democracy. Sure, you can voice your concerns, but that is the most you can do until you have to wait until the end of their term to use your granted power and remove them from the position. And that's only if the majority agrees with you. This is why I've never understood the point of protesting. Do we seriously believe standing on a sidewalk with picket signs during permitted hours are going to change a politician's mind and side with you over the wishes of their lobbying donors? Knowing all this, are you willing to continue to fight with your neighbor who is struggling as much as you are when they say something negative about your respective rich politician? A politician that sleeps in a mansion when both of you sleep in a shack? It is not my intention to paint all individuals who seek out political office as having the worst of motives. I realize that there are those out there who legitimately wish to make some kind of positive difference. Instead, my goal is to help you notice the trends that have tirelessly continued for so long and have done nothing to improve our world. To bring it home, here's a small exercise you can do on a daily basis with your mind to help you see things differently. With every pothole you see, let the words of politicians echo in your mind as they talk about sending another $1 billion package overseas. With every homeless person you see, remember the cheering at ball games when the new state-of-the-art warplanes fly overhead. With every mass shooting, cancer diagnosis, or reported murder down the street. Remember being told that Russia, China, Iran, or some other nation is your number one threat. Now ask yourself, is going down the ballot and checking every box with an R or a D every 4 years really the answer?
Since the United States will not be an aggressor nation, the place and type of war, if we should be engaged in one, will be set by the enemy. This means that any program of military preparedness must be comprehensive, because if there are weak elements in our armor, those will be the points at which a skillful enemy will strike. Only by a system of universal military training in which every young citizen performs this service to his country for preparation to meet its possible needs can we see any possibility for maintaining our armed forces with strength and reserves adequate to face the possibility of war. If we desire to secure peace, it must be known that we are at all times ready for war. It was in line with this principle that Washington advocated, as Mrs. Patton has said, a system for universal military training for our country. It is for the same reason that we advocate it now, and we believe that the argument for it is stronger now than ever before because of the character of modern warfare, and that universal military training will remain a component of any adequate system of military security until such time as the United Nations have established an international police force with adequate powers and without weakening limitations.
We tend to have a false sense of civility when we view ourselves through a historical lens. We believe that because we settle most of our disputes in courtrooms that we are far more civilized than our ancestors. Nothing could be further from the truth. When it came to war, our primitive ancestors lived in a world filled with extreme scarcity, superstition, tribalism, and ignorance. For them, war was a matter of survival, nobility, and oftentimes conquest. Today, we live in the digital information age. Hardly any answer to any question is beyond our reach. We've put people on the moon, made air travel a normalcy, and harnessed the power of artificial intelligence. Based off the standards our ancestors set, war should be an ancient concept of the past. Yet it's still a looming shadow that plagues our species daily. Conquest still remains the goal, not geographically, but economically.
Think about the last several wars that we've been in. What exactly did we win? Are we better off now than we were back then, or did we just create more generational hatred?
We will always have debate about the justification of the Vietnam War, Korean War, and the other more recent wars of our time. But when it comes to World War II, it's spoken about like a time of heroism and nobility. We proudly look upon it as a time when evil was defeated by the good. But when we examine what took place during the war, the lines between good and evil become more skewed. Germany had the infamous concentration camps. Japan had Unit 731, which conducted human experimentation on Chinese nationals. Italy targeted civilians with starvation and poisonous gas. France executed POWs without trial. The United Kingdom carried out a bombing raid on the civilians of Dresden. Russian Soviets pillaged and raped German women upon invading Berlin. And the US deployed 2 nuclear bombs on 2 Japanese civilian populaces. Now, does this really sound like a black and white war of good against evil? There will always be those who will try to justify the nuking of civilians by saying it prevented so many more deaths from occurring. But can we really in good conscience admit to ourselves that the killing of civilians is justified in order to prevent the deaths of soldiers? Yes, this is all history and there is nothing we can do to change it. But it's important to notice these things in order to see through the narratives we are given. For example, how many times are you told to be appreciative of those who died in a war for you to be free? Unless we are speaking about the Revolutionary War or the Civil War, what freedom did we secure for ourselves exactly in any war we fought within the last century? The entire narrative of the Vietnam War was to prevent the spread of communism. Yet we pulled out of the war before any victory was declared, and the big red wave of communism still never enveloped the world like it was forecasted to, thus resulting in a major waste of human life on both sides. What about the narrative of being told that the reason why America is so prosperous is because we have been blessed by God, as if God would willingly single us out of the other 194 countries, including those in the Middle East, who are far more religious and the birthplace of the Abrahamic beliefs? When we use critical thinking, we can see through the narrative and admit that the fact that our prosperity is found in bloodshed. Our founding is thanks to the Trail of Tears. Our size is thanks to the Mexican-American War. The entire birth of our nation was through the violence and carnage between the colonists, the British, the French, the Spanish, and the indigenous. It wasn't given by God. Once we won our prosperity, we maintain it through power. You may have heard the phrase, the US dollar is backed by the military. Well, there you have it. Our goals of profiteering from the spoils of war have not changed. We just sugarcoat the cover story with glamorous rhetoric. Is our defense budget just shy of $1 trillion really because we are protecting ourselves from outside threats? Or is there money to be made? The truth is, war is big business, and such a business can be expected in a capitalist system. A system that allows the stock of defense contractors to be publicly traded in Wall Street. How can we expect war of any kind to disappear from the world when such things exist? Why pursue peace when war is so much more profitable? Some would argue that war will never go away because it's a part of human nature. This is actually not true, at least not in terms of our biological makeup. We don't have a war gene, but we will cover that later. So why are we even talking about this? Well, if we are to see the systems of control we are at the mercy of, we must accept the fact that war is an obsolete, hypocritical system that we don't have to live with. A system that lies to our youth about heroism and patriotism, so the idea of being maimed for economic gain does not deter their participation. It's hypocritical to have a judicial system that punishes the act that war advocates. We imprison domestic murderers while issuing medals to those who kill overseas. We try to distinguish between murder and killing by covering it with justifiable fallacies. Can we in all seriousness say that when the government tells us to kill, that makes it okay? We look down on those who kill in the name of their gods, but praise those who kill in the name of their governments. We cheer when a new warplane or ship is unveiled. We limit an individual's right to self-defense within the confines of distance and touch, but call the act of seeking out and targeting of another nation self-defense. We expect the populace to handle differences through peaceful means, but actively flash images of carnage across the TV screen when our leaders don't agree and call it patriotism. We censor curse words, obscene gestures, and offensive slogans, but will air the death count, battle footage, and descriptions of acts committed by the enemy. We fly million-dollar warplanes over sporting events as a glamorous display of power while the crowds below cheer from underneath their crippling cost of living. We push principles of not tolerating violence to bring about change, yet spend $800 billion on finding new ways of creating violence to bring change. We dramatize recruitment commercials to inspire the youth to sell their bodies in the name of service to one's own country, yet we abandon them after they return with psychological issues and physical disabilities. Breakthrough technology is funneled into weapons development decades before it's used for the betterment of our world. For example, the SR-71 was retired 34 years ago, yet we are still commercially limited to cylindrical jets that can't even legally achieve speeds of Mach 1. The reasons we are told is because of cost effectiveness. There you have it. It's more cost effective to design revolutionary aircraft that can kill more efficiently over planes that can transport our populace more efficiently. Speaking of cost effectiveness, it would take only 18% of our war budget to clean all plastic out of the world's oceans. thus enhancing marine life. However, we instead use the ocean for target practice. So how about it? Is war a necessary evil that must exist for us to survive? Or is it the largest profit-based industry on Earth? Or is it both? By the end of this film, I hope the answer is obvious to us. But speaking of evil, perhaps we should move on and address the greatest evil in our world, the system that is the cause of more deaths and human suffering than all the wars combined. Of the 4,200 religions in this world and the thousands of gods they each serve, there is one that stands above them all. A faith and belief that controls every human being on this planet to the point of playing a role in every aspect of our lives. A religion so widespread that not one corner of the 7 continents hasn't been touched by it. Every other religion answers to it either directly or indirectly. It occupies the minds of both adolescents and elderly alike. It causes some to lose sleep and others to slumber. It is the central focus of all wars. Some of its acolytes risk prison sentences to promote it, while others seek out ways to help others manage it. It is the very seed of corruption within the human soul, yet it carries with it a hunger in some to desire more. It gives power to the powerful and impoverishes the impoverished. This master god of all religions, all systems, and all people in our world is called money. A powerful and oppressive deity that's just as fake as the rewards it promises. Money is a made-up concept based entirely on faith. It is not tangible, nor is it eternal. Beyond Earth's atmosphere, it does not exist. If you were to jump in a spaceship and travel to Pluto, your concept of money would be entirely useless there. It would hold no value whatsoever because there is no one else there to carry on the faith with. You would instead be forced to rely on reality and the physical laws of the universe for survival. Yet, we as a race have allowed ourselves to be confined within the imaginary walls of physical imprisonment. We call it finance and swear our lives to it. We tell ourselves lies about how it brings incentive to the human condition. We allow it to strip us of our natural instincts and pretend that it makes us civilized. It brings compromise to our way of thinking. Those of us in the West declare ourselves to be lovers of freedom and conquerors of tyrannical oppression, but we invalidate this belief by willingly clocking into a dictatorship every morning and submitting ourselves in complete servitude to the master of the establishment. We believe it to be the opposite of slavery because we are given the artificial incentive through the salvation of this made-up God at the end of the week or every 2 weeks. We claim it's not slavery because it's voluntary. How voluntary is something when our refusal to participate brings a halt to our livelihood? How voluntary is something when it has direct control over our shelter, our sustenance, our medical needs, and our mental stability? How voluntary is something when rejecting it can bring down your class value within the religion of economics? That is a level of control that the dictators of the 20th century could have only dreamed of. But somehow, we have placed a silver lining around the concept and called it the free market. We then take that concept and use it as a scale to determine the worth of another individual.
For example, how many times have you heard somebody referred to as a bum for not holding down a job? And how many times have you had the immediate response to your brain to judge an individual who chooses not to work? Now hold that thought for a moment and ask yourself how many times that you have fantasized about not having to work in the future due to acquiring some type of substantial wealth. How different are you from them? Really, the only difference is that that individual has chosen to do so before that moment arrived for them.
Now, let's go one step further and ask ourselves if this system is really so great. Why are we constantly looking for ways of escaping it? Ever since the rise of social media, the number of people who have tried their hand in the entrepreneurial field has increased substantially. Everything from online pyramid schemes to amateur dropshipping only makes it more evident that so many are wanting to escape from these established dictatorships that control our lives. If you still don't believe that these private enterprises have control over your life, then ask yourself why you hesitate to post something controversial online, such as an unpopular political opinion, a critical viewpoint of an individual, or simply last Friday night's night out. After all, it's your social media account, and you have the First Amendment protection to do so. Is it because you fear your employer might see it? How is it your boss is able to reach out from beyond the time clock and into your home to control such actions? What about when you are forced to miss out on a family memory being made because the master of the establishment denied you the time to do so? You have to ask the master for permission to attend such events, and if you go against the master's decision, then you risk losing everything you've worked for. And if that master fires you, your chances of finding a new master become more difficult once your record with the previous one is looked into.
Biden and the Democrats are desperate to distract from the real issues, which is that their party has been taken over by socialists, extremists, and probably communists. I think it's beyond socialism. I think it's a step beyond, and could be many steps beyond if you take a look. And that if they win, they will nominate justices who will destroy the American way of life, the American dream. They will destroy the American dream. They'll destroy America. They'll destroy the United States of America.
By now, you've probably begun to assume that by talking about this that I'm some kind of socialist or an advocate of laziness. That is not true at all. But since we are on the topic, let's examine the flaws of capitalism for a moment. Advocates of free market capitalism will often say that it's the best system we can get because it provides opportunity for all. In theory, this is correct, but practically, this is not possible, because the system depends on the division of classes. There must be losers so that the winners can thrive. We can see an example of this through inflation. The more money that is in the system, the more rich people, the more worthless it is. If everyone was a millionaire, then $1 million would become the new $1. Imagine if everyone was a winner, if we all became CEOs of our own business. These businesses wouldn't last long because there was no one left to serve as cogs in the machine. Therefore, the system demands that the majority must remain losers, despite its promises of prosperity of all through enough effort. Knowing this, how in the world can we consider this ethical? We can be honest with ourselves and admit that free market capitalism has gotten us far and allowed us to have a lot of things we enjoy today. But despite all of its positives and the things it has provided in the past, it has its consequences. We are beginning to see the emergence of monopolies, which is no surprise in these late stages. Monopolies are to be expected when capitalism has gone on too long. The free market is no longer free when nobody else can compete. We try to prevent such things through legislation, but how much can you legislate and still call it a free market? Where exactly is the line drawn before it becomes communistic? Capitalism should be viewed as a stepping stone into something better. It shouldn't be viewed as the end-all be-all. But let's get back to the source of the problem: money. Our entire judicial and legislative system is centered around money. When a law is broken, a fine can be issued, as if that reverses the whole thing. When somebody commits a crime, it is usually money-driven in some way. Now I know that you're probably ready to turn off the video by this point, because you're picturing in your mind the most atrocious criminals of the past, wondering how their crimes are money-driven. Well, let's see. Let's think critically for a moment and start to look at more realistic reasons behind why crimes are committed. Why does a thief steal? Why does a kidnapper demand a ransom? Why does the troubled employee bring a gun to work? Why are there muggers? Why are there drug dealers? Now you're probably asking, what about the predators and those who have committed the most vile of offenses? Yes, even these are money related, and I'll explain why. One hot topic in this country right now is mental health. Those who have committed sexual crimes can be clearly linked to unresolved mental health issues. During adolescence, mental health signals can be given off through a child's behavior, but we tend to ignore these things for two reasons. One is because of the lack of education around mental health, and two, because of the cost of treatment. The average cost of mental health treatment is over $10,000 annually. In a world where scarcity is a thing, the average person is going to prioritize their spending on essential items such as food, shelter, physical and medical needs, and transportation. Due to the stigma surrounding it, one is not going to devote $10,000 on mental health treatment when they are more worried about making rent every month. Insurance companies also do not consider mental health to be important because it's not considered life-saving or preventive treatment. With these factors at play, it's no wonder there's a mental health crisis and so many sexual crimes occurring. Had most of these individuals received the treatment they needed at an earlier time, they would not act on such impulses. This goes beyond just sexual offenses. This goes for those who murder, abuse animals, and those who commit suicide. Had money not been an issue, a lot of sad things would not be so. Now one can say, well, look how rich celebrities are, yet a lot of them are depressed and become drug dependent and suicidal. What about the rich people who commit crimes? That is true, but that is also due to money, not the lack of it, but the illusion it creates. The claim that money is an incentive is as artificial as the value we place on it. Real incentive is not tangible. We view money as an incentive because we've been forced to live in a system where it's needed to do anything. We also equate it with power, a type of power that is also an illusion. How insulting is it for us in the 21st century to still consider someone who has an abundance of things to be powerful, especially when such things were acquired through the abundance of something else entirely made up. Actual incentive comes from within, the fulfillment of the soul. For example, have you ever volunteered for some event that was being held for a good cause, such as working for a charity or helping someone in serious need? Remember how you felt afterward? That fullness of contentment knowing you made a positive difference? Now try to think of something that money can buy that would make you feel that exact same way. If you're having trouble doing so, then you're starting to understand my point. That is what actual incentive is. It makes you want to do it again. It encourages you to find other ways of feeling that way again, even if there is no monetary merit on the other side. Money only presents the illusion of fulfillment because it satisfies a temporary need for fulfillment with artificial things. What about the artist or the musician? How do you feel after you completed a song you've always wanted to learn? How do you feel when you finish a painting you spend countless hours on? What about when others compliment it and praise the fine work you've done despite not receiving money from them? Sure, some might care only about the money, but many absorb the praise like a sponge and try to do better on the next piece because of the real incentive. Now, imagine this on a global scale. Imagine true incentive being the goal of businesses around the world, not the profit of fake money. Money incentivizes a business to deliver goods with the idea of planned obsolescence so that those goods can continue to be purchased. Thus, we always need new cars because our current ones will need to be replaced. We will always need new cell phones, new shoes, new clothes, new materials because it's not cost effective for a business to sell something only once. This is what money coupled with capitalism has done to us. It has kept the human race in its infancy by constantly relying on the continuity of problems just so we can have jobs that fix those problems. We have jobs that create problems and jobs that fix problems. We bomb so we can rebuild. We demolish so we can construct. If the criminal doesn't commit crimes, then the police, lawyer, judge, and jailer cannot keep their jobs. If the cancer is cured, then the pharmacies, cancer centers, and specialists shut down and lose their jobs. If the car never breaks down, then the mechanic, the part dealers, and the salesmen lose their jobs. If our highways never wear down and form potholes, then the construction workers, heavy equipment manufacturers, and OSHA workers all lose their jobs. If common ground is established and war is a thing of the past, then weapons manufacturing shuts down and contractors lose their jobs. The god of money keeps us as cogs in the machine while our youth slips by our eyes. We remain as slaves to it, constantly searching for a way out through gambling with our time and what little we do earn. We constantly plan for a retirement we may never see, and if we do see it, we can only enjoy it for a few years before our health toils. We ask our rich masters for the courtesy of granting us a week to experience what life was meant to feel like. We separate ourselves into classes because one may have more than another, and the one with the most has all the importance over the rest. We ignore the homeless man on the street who is full of stories and unique things to share, while listening to those who are empty vessels on a stage because their change purse is busting at the seams. We pursue dreams with the mindset of what makes us rich and not with the mindset of what enriches us. We spend so much time seeking out the almighty dollar that we find little time in learning more about ourselves. We ignore scientific and artistic endeavors because it's not considered cost effective.
We work 137 hours a year, more than the Japanese, who are very hard workers. We work 260 hours a year more than the British, and almost 500 hours a year more than the French. Now, what ends up happening when people are working incredible hours, and we have a situation today where 85% of male workers are working more than 40 hours a week. 66% of women workers are working more than 40 hours a week. What's the result of that in the real world? The real result is that people are stressed out. People are physically and emotionally exhausted.
So what solution am I proposing? Socialism? Communism? The bartering of goods? Actually, none of these. The solution is educating everyone on true incentive and the prioritization of the betterment of ourselves and not on useless profit margins. This can be categorized as resource-based economics. More on that later. For now, let's conclude the dissection of this pillar by viewing ourselves through a proverbial microscope. Let me draw a picture in your mind for a moment. Imagine that you were examining another planet and you discovered a race of primitive people not different from us. As you examined these people, you watched as they spent every day of their lives scurrying about trying to gather as much sand from a beach as they could. They would take this sand and pile it up in their respective dwellings every day. You begin to notice that a few have bigger piles of sand than the others, and because of this, they now get to make all the rules and are the most popular there. You watch as some sit and listen to these select few give them advice about other aspects of life and how to acquire more sand for themselves, but do not offer any of their own sand to pass out. You remain for decades, observing as you watch these people spend their entire lives stressing and fighting over sand until eventually they die from old age, still clutching onto whatever sand they do have. You then look around and see the vast and beautiful world these people lived on but never ventured to see or learn more about. The only ones who were able to were the ones with the biggest piles of sand. You're confused because you look at the sand and cannot understand what was so valuable about it, since it provided no practical purpose other than status and class to these people who declared it to be valuable. However, the value they placed on the sand was nothing more than a social construct they made up. Just like the people of this planet, we too have handicapped ourselves into living within the boundaries of a made-up social construct that we've been brainwashed into believing has value. In fact, we think it has so much value that we are willing to trade the precious time of our one life for it. We have fallen into physical depravity, and the sooner we break free of these social constructs, the sooner we can mature out of our infancy. Although the world may be governed and controlled by a godlike illusion of money, the universe itself is governed by something real and much greater. This governing force is called natural law. It is the only law that matters in the span of the cosmos. Natural law, in its basic definition, means that humans are born with a natural moral code and that our behaviors are based off this code. It is through understanding of this law that we can understand the nature of ourselves and why we behave the way we do. Unlike the concept of money, which doesn't exist beyond our atmosphere, no matter where you go in the universe, natural law will always apply. To expand on the definition of natural law beyond just humanity, we can look at the laws of physics, the law of motion, thermodynamics, gravitation, the Archimedes principle, and so on. These laws cannot be broken, and everything depends on them. By understanding this, we can clearly see the obsolescence and utter pointlessness of man-made laws. Just like with money, the concept of man's law is made up, hollow, and only as sturdy as the institutions that uphold it. Man's law is a stack of paper and ink. If burned, it would only last so long as the memories of those who know of them don't fade. Unlike natural law, man's law is only followed out of fear of consequence. Natural law ensures the continuity of the universe, whereas man's law ensures the continuity of a select system. Natural law is unchanging, whereas man's law changes based on several factors. Natural law does not discriminate. Man's law is based on culture. We've been brought up to believe that man's law is necessary in order to keep peace and order within a society. We believe that without man's law, there would be chaos similar to a Mad Max scenario. What we fail to take notice of is that the only purpose man's law seems to serve is the determination of consequence. A law that says it's illegal to murder does not prevent murder. Not one society on this planet has an instance of zero murders being committed with an anti-murder law in place. We have seen time and time again that if someone intends on committing an act of violence, no law in the books is going to stop them. Therefore, the police are a reactionary force, not a preventive one. Drug laws do not stop the trafficking of drugs. Instead, they criminalize the victim of an addiction brought on by the pressures of the fake system they're born into.
I always find it amusing when laws are used to improve the safety features of technical applications. For example, when the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed in Baltimore, I remember hearing on the news how lawmakers were going to come together and discuss ways to prevent something like this from happening in the future, as if the entire technical failure of that cargo ship that hit the bridge was a legal issue. No man-made law is going to prevent an incident like that from happening when the technical failure has no choice but to follow in accordance with natural law.
You can have a man-made law that says all cars must stop at a red light, but if the car's brakes fail, it's going to go through the red light anyways and cause an injury or a fatality because it's following the natural law of inertia. The issues of our natural and technical world are not legal problems, they are technical problems. We cannot legislate our way into a better world. Of course, one could say that laws are made so that technical issues can be prevented or that safety is ensured. But as I said earlier, those laws will not matter if they are not followed. We could take a look at the recent controversy involving Boeing. The technical failure of the doors blowing out on the planes was caused by a lack of following safety procedures. In other words, man's law. The only thing the law did was bring consequence to that event, but the damage was still done, not prevented. But let's bring the human equation into focus regarding laws. Earlier, we looked into the causes of atrocious crimes being linked back to mental health taking a backseat to financial priority. If we take a more serious approach to psychiatric and psychological fields of study, we can see how the criminal mind can be easily linked back to natural law, therefore making it easier to understand and to treat. Instead, in our world of artificial man-made laws, when a person commits a murder, our society riles up our primal side, and we automatically begin demanding they be incarcerated or executed. We feel the innate need for vengeance as images of the victim and their families are flashed across the TV screen to play on our emotions. We involuntarily take the easy way out and assume the perpetrator is evil or irredeemable. It's understandable that we feel this way because we immediately imagine ourselves in the shoes of the victim and their families as our empathy takes over. Rarely, if ever, do we do the same for the perpetrator because it's an uncomfortable and undesirable thing to do. It's taboo to want to place ourselves behind the eyes of a killer. However, if we are to fully understand human behavior in accordance to natural law, we will have to learn to do so. It is by no accident that a high number of perpetrators of sexual crimes were at one time victims of the same thing themselves. especially if it occurred during their adolescence when their brain was still developing. Yet, when we see them standing in a courtroom on trial, we automatically feel nothing but disgust for them, and even go so far as to hoping it happens to them again when they arrive at the prison. As difficult as it is to do, we should instead critically think for a moment and ask ourselves if the person would have committed the horrible act if they received the help they needed years prior. What about those with less severe crimes, like those who steal, those who come from a poor background or neglected upbringing? What exactly does prison do for them? It locks them in isolation with others like them in hopes that the punishment will magically change their entire past. Prison doesn't solve the problem. It compounds it with psychological stress. This is why recidivism is so high. Prison, just like man's law, is based entirely on punishment and not on rehabilitation. If money was not an issue, each criminal that is processed could be brought into a facility, have their brain analyzed, have their past evaluated, and the identified problem could be immediately addressed before release. As outlandish and unrealistic as this may sound, doesn't it sound more prudent than simply locking a group of people in a room behind a cage and hoping for the best once they leave? If so, then why don't we do this? Some facilities try to help by having school and work programs, but this does not solve the issue. This simply primes the inmate to fit in with the profit-based world outside. It does not solve the underlying issues that brought the person there in the first place. It always falls right back to the good old profit-based economic system we live in. 10% of all incarcerated individuals in the U.S. are being held in private prisons. These private prisons generate their revenue through correctional contracts and are dependent on the number of prisoners they house. Through this type of setup, these prisons turn over a $7 billion profit annually. So why would we fund efforts for rehabilitation when recidivism is much more profitable? Arguments can be made that private prisons are necessary due to the strain on the Department of Corrections not being able to handle the abundance of incarcerated people. However, we need to ask ourselves, why is there even a strain? The U.S. has the highest incarceration rate in the world, and many of these are due to man-made laws which contain mandatory minimums, especially when it comes to drug offenses. It's ironic. America prides itself on being the free world, but holds the title of the country with the most laws, most regulations, most policing bodies, and most incarcerated in the world. We have federal laws, state laws, municipal laws, ordinances, and stipulations. There are so many laws in the U.S. that the exact number in existence is unknown to a single person, all man-made. We vote in elections to hire or rehire lawyers and assign the title legislator to them with the singular purpose of passing more laws. We have lawyers who prosecute based off these laws, lawyers who defend against the prosecutors, and lawyers who judge the outcome. Many laws are obsolete and fall under the premise of dumb laws, but instead of eliminating them, we keep them for some reason. We're told over and over that being a nation of laws is a good thing because laws protect us. This is not true, as we have already seen earlier. Laws are reactionary, not preventive. We have a law that says mugging is illegal, but we can't depend on that law fully enough to trust walking down a dark alley at night. We hear that man-made laws are what keep us civilized and morally stable. But how civil is a society that locks someone who has unpaid child support charges in a room with someone who is mentally unstable enough to kill? Even more ridiculous is the concept of white-collar crimes. Crimes which go hand in hand with the fake concept of money and the imaginary constructs of corporations and bureaucracies. Crimes in which the victim is only a victim under the guise that they live within the imaginary construct of play. Such crimes merit heavy prison sentences in which the individual's natural life is robbed from them, all because the make-believe system deems it necessary. To drive home my point, imagine for a moment that you're a child again, and you are with a group of friends who just built a fort in the woods. You and the group make up a system of rules that, if not followed, merit the punishment of being banned from playing with them again. Now, imagine breaking one of these rules. Your friends have taken it so seriously that they refuse to see you ever again, and you're not allowed to come near the fort or even the woods for the rest of your life. This is exactly how our system works. We humans have made up a society that operates within the barriers of natural law, but have invented our own laws with heavy consequences. Yet, the only reason these laws remain is because everyone continues to participate and follow the guidelines of the made-up system. A system made up by people who have been dead for centuries. We all continue to play make-believe. In reality, these laws only exist on paper. So how do we prevent muggings, violent assaults, thievery, and all other forms of crime that harm others? The elimination of poverty. The ridding of the world from the influence of the god called money. A thief has no reason to steal when he lives in abundance. We don't see anyone being greedy with oxygen. When all basic human needs are met, crime begins to fade. It's no accident that crime happens the most in high poverty areas. If you're in a room full of dogs that are well fed, and you throw a steak in front of them, they might look at it for a moment, out of curiosity, but then they'll go back to ignoring it. When you're in a room full of starving dogs whose rib cages are showing, and you throw the same piece of steak on the ground, they'll fight and even kill each other for it. That doesn't make them evil. It makes them scarcity driven. What about those who are well off and still commit heinous crimes? Look at the crime and think critically about the motive behind it. When we refocus our attention on educating our young with how to handle differences and conflict, we'll see a shift in human behavior that we are so quick to dismiss as human nature. Our educational system has failed to teach us how to learn more about ourselves. Our system is money-driven and focuses more on career seeking rather than understanding the world we were born into. Students are taught how to better live within the invisible walls of our civilized world and not taught how to better themselves through understanding and critical thinking. How many times have you heard of a liberal arts degree referred to as useless simply because it doesn't bring a promising future full of riches? Art is an expression of both culture and the mind. It's through art that we can understand not only ourselves but each other. Art can tell us that a child at an early age may be disturbed and we can get them the help they need before they become an unstable adult. Our education should teach us how to be problem solvers, not money makers. It should teach us how to better the world, not how to profit from it. As I said before, police don't have a job if crimes are not committed. Prisons cannot operate if convictions are not made. Lawyers cannot work if conflict is not taking place. Therefore, man's law must remain if profit is to be had. Now that we've examined and deconstructed the four major pillars of our societal imprisonment, it wouldn't be prudent to simply end the conversation without proposing a solution. To not do so would simply make this whole film nothing more than a useless rant, and there is already more than enough of that out there. Let's first look at what an iconoclast is. It's someone who attacks the institutions or traditions or beliefs in such institutions. This doesn't have to mean physical attacks. Up until this point, we've attacked with critical assessment the pillars of society that have done nothing but oppress us, not only as human beings, but as individuals. Yes, it is oppression, because there is no freedom in being forced to live and think a certain way as long as it fits within the status quo. My goal has been to help us reclaim our mind, because our mind is the one thing in our current society that we do have complete control over. If I haven't made it clear yet, most people are currently not free thinkers. We believe that because we can freely speak on matters such as politics, weather, ideas, and concepts that we are free thinkers. But if our ideas are trapped inside the box that is not allowed to be broken without shame and scrutiny, then our minds are not free. If you bring a different viewpoint to the world that offers to better our way of life, but that viewpoint is heavily attacked and you are labeled with an undesirable title simply because it's rejected by the masses, and these attacks force you to revert to the old ways, you're not a free thinker. Therefore, before we can bring about any change to our world, we must first and foremost reclaim our mind. Society tells us we are free thinkers because we can discuss politics, so long as those political views are within reason. You must either be red or blue or centrist. Anything outside of this, then you're un-American. Society tells us we are free thinkers because we can discuss ways to improve our economy, so long as our ideas fit within the spectrum of capitalism. Anything outside of that parameter means you are socialist and therefore un-American. You can be religious so long as that religion fits within what the culture deems appropriate. Speaking of religion, I haven't spoken much about it on this video because although it's a cultural system of invisible parameters, it is still a voluntary one, unlike the others. But I'll discuss it briefly here. The main problem with any religion, especially in this modern age, is the hyper-focusing on the concept of an afterlife. Although the belief in such isn't harmful in and of itself, the heavy dependence on the possibility can have consequences on our current world. After all, why would anyone care to fix the world when they are convinced they could just die and move on to a better one? Unfortunately, this is a real problem today and can be easily observed in people who identify as highly religious, as they display an apathetic attitude towards progression. They see the world as a temporary place that is doomed anyway. This can only spell disaster for our future descendants. Our mindset must extend beyond ourselves if we wish for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren to have a better life than we have. If we continue to be destructive in our culture because we assume a better life awaits beyond, then we are going to have to learn to embrace an uncomfortable amount of change if we want to save ourselves. We can embrace the positivity that religion brings while also rejecting the negativity that comes with it. We can apply the golden rule that Jesus taught and treat each other as we would like to be treated. We can apply the belief of Hindus and view all life as sacred. We can follow the second noble truth of Buddhism, that craving is the root of all suffering, which can be seen with our current world's obsession with the constant chasing of money and the acquisition of things. These things we can already do without changing anything except ourselves. As I've shown in this series already, currently human beings are very selfish, but this is not because of human nature, nor is it our fault. This is due to the scarcity-driven mindset that we should have long evolved out of. It's the same mindset our cave-dwelling ancestors had, because their understanding of science and technology was severely undeveloped. To them, if they didn't fight, kill, or steal, they starved. Selfishness was the basis of their survival, and if they attempted to reject it, they died. Like I said earlier, we don't have a war gene. We have a survival instinct. In our current information age, this is an absurd mindset to still live under. Yet, we are forced to because we still serve the false money god. We view the possession of things as a catalyst for power. We've attempted to balance that power with false legislation of man's law, given to us by politicians who seek such power through the deception of their voters. Once this sense of power is achieved, the use of violent force through pointless wars is implemented, so that power can be protected. We are still in our infancy as a race. We have not moved out of that proverbial cave. We've simply made it bigger. If the governments of the world were to remove power from the politicians and hand it over to the scientists, the standard of living for all individuals would improve so dramatically it would be almost impossible to imagine the life we have now. This would have to be done by scientists who do not have agendas outside of bettering the world. To accomplish that, the concept of incentive would have to be redefined to its proper definition. Not the false incentive of money as discussed earlier, but the true incentive of fulfillment through improvement. We're constantly browbeat and told to thank capitalism for everything we have today. This is false. We instead should thank a scientist for what we have today. This includes engineers, doctors, physicists, and so on. No politician in history is ever credited with solving problems. However, history does look kindly on the free thinkers of old who innovated, tested, and researched. A scientist is willing to accept when they are wrong and look for a solution, whereas a politician will double down to please their voters. What I'm describing might sound like a technocracy, but it's actually beyond that. This is only the first step. The problems of our world must be viewed from a technical solution. As I explained earlier, legislating will not solve many issues. For example, what is to prevent a car from running a red light and striking another car or pedestrian? A law won't stop that. But if a steel gate was to rise once the light began to turn red, the gate would prevent any more cars from proceeding through, and the pedestrians would have a safe crosswalk to commute through, as well as the opposing vehicles. What about interstates that are divided by a 4-foot-high concrete barrier? There are countless videos on the internet of cars losing control and hopping over these barriers, which can cause fatalities on the other side. What if we constructed the barriers higher than a measly 4 feet? Why not 15 feet? Or we could build a fence similar to what NASCAR tracks have around them, that's tall enough to prevent objects from coming over. The first argument you'll hear is, it's not cost effective, or it's not feasible. That is why the concept of money and false incentive must be shunned indefinitely. We must instead consider the lives that would be saved and the overall improvement to our way of life. Another argument you'll hear is, we don't need technology controlling us, or this is an attack on our freedoms. You'll typically hear this argument when safety-based technology is applied to cars or other forms of recreation. While the idea of personal liberty being undermined by AI or other types of technology sounds like a dystopian negative, one must consider the improvement to society. Nobody argues the idea of guardrails being on the side of the road as an impediment to your freedom to drive off a cliff, because we all collectively agree that they are necessary to prevent certain risk. In America, we have a habit of being selfish with a rebellious attitude of nobody telling us what to do. We also have an obsession with old things, old traditions, old ideals, old technology, old laws, old politicians, and old values. As a result, we have outdated infrastructure, outdated power sources, and outdated mentalities. Topics such as alternative energy sources should not be a political tennis ball. It should be the standard. We have the means to implement nuclear fission, tidal, geothermal, wind, and solar power. Instead of these means of energy becoming the norm, they're demonized and heavily debated, all in the name of jobs. Old jobs being replaced with new jobs has been a fact of life for centuries. The stagecoach salesman was replaced by the car salesman. The telephone operator was replaced by the cellular tower worker. The blacksmith was replaced by the steel worker. As is often the problem with the lack of critical thought, we are holding on to the belief that if old jobs are rendered obsolete, that we have no choice but to be homeless. This has never been the case. As technology progresses, so does the convenience of life. But we are instead hamstringing ourselves out of fear of the unknown. We continue to push for the continuity of the Dark Ages for the sake of familiarity. This is why I personally identify as both a futurist and a transhumanist. Well, you caught me. I just admitted to being a Satan worshiper who wants to use technology to be a god. You better turn off the video now or disregard everything I've said. At least, that's what you've been told that term means, right? A lot of conspiracy-crazed people hear the word transhumanism and automatically equate it with devil worship, or that I somehow desire to make myself a god among men. That is a completely false and exaggerated definition of the term. The word transhumanism is the basic belief that humans are capable of evolving beyond their current state. That's it. There might be some transhumanists out there who believe they can become gods with the implementation of technology, but that's of course a very extreme case. There's extreme cases of everything. Transhumanism itself isn't just a belief, but it's the way things are. As humanity advances its education, it's evolving. As technology becomes more integrated into our lives, the more we evolve. Another fear that needs to be addressed and overcome is the new age of artificial intelligence that we've suddenly found ourselves in. As a futurist, I'm thrilled to see it becoming a mainstream concept, as well as its implementation to our daily lives. Although we're still in the beginning stages of its development, and several years away from it evolving into a singularity, it's still fascinating that one of the most profound subjects of science fiction over the last century has now become a reality.
Before we arrived at this era of artificial intelligence, I remember hearing some pretty outlandish theories, and I still hear them to this day, about how AI is going to enslave all of us or take over the world. And the thing is these theories are based off science fiction novels and movies. They're not based off real-life examples. In fact, a common argument you'll hear is, have you never seen Terminator, or have you never seen iRobot? But the thing is even if AI was to develop into a singularity and be put into a mechanical body to make something like that possible, it still would lack the ability to develop emotions. Keep in mind that AI is simply just software, it's not a hormonal being. This is why we have to use critical thinking, and we can't just base everything off of fear. And what makes AI dangerous is the people that misuse it, not AI itself. This is why it's important that as technology develops, we must also develop our minds along with it. That is crucial.
I'm not strictly advocating for the development of advanced technology with no limits. Such a scenario would plunge us into a cyberpunk dystopian hellscape with the wrong people in charge. What I would love to see is a rapid social evolution of ourselves so that we can properly utilize technology to free ourselves from the pillars of current societal control. If we do not maintain pace with technological development in terms of our social development, we will only compound our problem. So if we were to imagine an ideal world for us humans, how would it look? What kind of economy would it be? What kind of laws would it have? It's not a difficult concept to imagine at all. A post-scarcity world through the process of implementing a resource-based economy. A focus that is void of profit, void of poverty, and void of old obsolete ideals and institutions. A world that declares the Earth's resources as the fundamental right of all living beings. Through the innovation of necessary technologies, not useless junk that is impractical. One organization that has made this their focus is called the Venus Project. For the sake of time, I'm not going to explain their entire layout of such an idea, but they have plenty of books and videos of their own where this information can be obtained. The first argument that everyone who hears such a radical concept brings is it'll never happen because humans are too selfish and violent. I've already given examples as to why this isn't true, but for the sake of bringing the argument to a close, we could take a look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Once our most basic needs are met, we move into our more complex needs. Once these are met, we desire to challenge ourselves in new ways by striving to be the best version of ourselves. This challenge can be satisfied by collectively working towards a better world for us all. Once we understand how simple we as human beings are, we can then understand how we are denying ourselves a much better way of life. We should be disgusted by the thought of an individual who is sick and in desperate need of medical care, needing money to receive a medical treatment or otherwise be left for dead. We should be disgusted by the idea of sending our young, who have so much to offer in their prime, off to waste their one life away, dying in a war that doesn't even affect less than 1% of the universe. We should be disgusted when we see security guards and surveillance cameras around every grocery store, when food, which is a necessity for the continuity of life, becomes increasingly unaffordable for the poor. We should be disgusted when we see fines being issued or cars being towed from individuals commuting to work and held for a fee. Individuals who are trying to provide for themselves and their families, all because a man-made law has told them a white sticker with some ink on it should have been switched out with a green sticker with some ink on it. And finally, we should be disgusted when we hear it's just the way it is. The callousness of our society does not align with the principles of the religions we boastfully proclaim to be a part of. But to be fair, We spend so much time trying to survive in our current system that we never have time to think about these things. Our minds are imprisoned because we spend more time worrying about how to overcome the next financial hurdle and less time asking ourselves why. We are more bothered by the sight of a thief stealing food than we are the starving homeless person on the street. We don't ask ourselves, why is this person stealing that item? Are they hungry? Are they in desperate need of money to buy their next drug? What kind of home life or upbringing did they have that deprived them of the guidance to teach them alternative ways of overcoming the problems of their life outside of crime? Instead, we demand they be locked up and never allowed to see daylight again. Something is very wrong with our world. So in conclusion, the only way this will ever be accomplished is to make our first step the most important one: education. Our educational system is a parody of the word education. Our schools are not centered around improvement of the individual or the training of their minds. Instead, they are centers for developing the next workforce by teaching them the basics and pushing them through so that at the age of 18, they become good employees. This is why when most high school students reach their senior year, they are bombarded with 3 choices: military, trade school, or college. All 3 are institutions of exploitation, not exploration. All 3 focus on corporations and not on the individual. We must reformulate our curriculums to teach our youth how to think, not what to think. Our schools should be humanity-driven, not career-driven. Our students should be taught how to solve problems instead of telling them to vote their way out of problems. We cannot vote our way out of the mess we are in. We can only come together and fix things without the burdensome hierarchy of pointless money-driven regulations. We must learn to critically think, ask questions, listen, and test our assumptions so that we can become iconoclasts. It won't be long before the desire to improve our way of life overcomes the desire for money. We must drop our selfishness and understand that there is no greater incentive than the witnessing of you and your fellow human living far better lives than what you were born into, thanks to your efforts. If everything I've said up until now has inspired you and helped you to understand that things are not hopeless, that a better future is possible, and you're ready to do your part in being an iconoclast by bringing real positive change to our society, not political change from red to blue or blue to red, but actual change, then here are some ways we can all start. Step 1. A grassroots education with a focus of training others how to critically think about the world they live in and the institutions they've been trained to live under. Learning the true meaning of incentive and examining problems the way the scientists would. Step 2. Look for solutions by following the natural laws of the universe. This means avoid the pointless effort of legislating and instead find concrete methods to overcome each issue. Every problem has a source, and that source must be fixed, not the symptom, just like a sickness. Step 3. Disregard the dilemma of cost-effectiveness and refocus on the progression and betterment of humanity. The idea of profit should be shunned, while the idea of well-being should be embraced. And finally, Step 4. Non-complicity. It is important that we don't fall into the familiar habit of letting our minds wander and laziness to creep in. As technology increases, we must also increase with it. A common issue we are seeing today is the advancement of technology and the dumbing down of a generation. As an AI learns to think more, so should we. As a computer scans every option to find a problem, so should we. Now, of course, this is just my personal list and not a foolproof solution. But I feel it's best to present a plan of action. Otherwise, everything in this video is just useless information.
So there you have it. Now that you see that we've been playing a game unwittingly since birth, the question now is, are we going to continue to play, or are we going to break ourselves free of it? I've done my best to show you that the future is not hopeless. We can make it great. But before we do that, we must first learn to reclaim our mind. We have to be willing to ask the hard questions and learn to play devil's advocate. Otherwise, all this is going to continue to stay the same way it's always been. And I think if we're 100% honest with ourselves, no one's truly happy with the world right now. The future is ours, and so is our choices. I'll see you there.
reaching out for something grand. Tomorrow waits in distant lands. Together we will take a stand. Hearts beating with a shared desire to lift each other ever higher. From the ashes we will rise with visions bright and our